Hi,
Hello, Andy.
how are you doing? Hi, Dan. Is it Dan
Very
or Dan?
good. Whichever you prefer, but Dan is fine.
Okay.
Andy is good.
Yes.
All right. Hey, thanks for joining me on a late Friday afternoon. I appreciate you taking the time for it. I don't want to take up too much of your time, as much as you'll allow me to, I guess, on a Friday afternoon. But I wanted to connect with you on a number of items, but generally I would defer to you and previously Alicia, who I believe was in your role
Yes.
for
Yeah.
retirement issues. And I've spoken with her a number of times and have all the utmost respect for everything you all do. I wouldn't mind if we could just start with a little intro of you. I know quite a bit about your background, but if you have anything that you think you could share that would be helpful, kind of to give your background and why you're in the retirement space.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I early in my career I have a graduate degree in public policy. So government policy issues have always been essentially my career. And I started out as an analyst with the US Government Accountability Office in the 90s. Um, And within a year or two, well, actually, I would say like the second project I think I got assigned to was already focused on the aging of the US population and the implications of that. Within a few years, I ended up with the working on basically long range fiscal policy issues and the drivers of long-term budget deficits. And so the aging of the population played a big part in that. And I learned about Social Security and Medicare financing. Um, so that was what I did in for a big chunk of the 90s. And then I switched, made the switch over to Boston College and started with the Center for Retirement Research as the communications director.
A
Um,
natural line from one to the other, huh?
it was pretty natural. I went from being an analyst to more of a communications person, but that
Sure.
was otherwise the subject matter was very similar. So that was that made the career transition much easier. And having the substance matter expertise in that area has been helpful as a communications person, obviously. So I've done
Very.
that. I've been with the center forever. We were a startup with 4 people when I joined. We're about 20 some people now. And that's the story. And then Alicia retired, and from that role, she's still a senior advisor with the center, so she's still around. Um, but I assumed that role.
What problems do you guys see as your main problems that you're trying to solve for people in retirement? And specifically maybe in your new role now, how do you feel like getting information out to the public is changed and how is that how is your role what is your role in that effort?
I guess looking at the issues that we're most concerned about right now, I mean, there's some of our, we think we say that we say that our purview is anything that can affect money in retirement. So that gives us actually a pretty broad area. And we've done work on student loan issues and student debt issues in the past, stretching all the way to how are people going to pay for long-term care and retirement. I think we've been increasingly focused on the near-term challenge. Well, I should say, yeah, so there's really a lifelong interest in the workforce from that standpoint. We're interested in how people are going to prepare themselves at every step of the way. So we're continually interested in the issue of employment plan, retirement savings plans that are based in the workplace and that make it easy for people to save. Obviously, that's been the 401k system for many years now as the dominant part of that. Um, but even so, there's a very large chunk of the private sector population that at any given time does not have access to a workplace retirement plan. And so expanding that coverage base through finding ways to get small employers to adopt plans, finding ways for government initiatives like you're probably familiar with the state auto IRAs that have started up in a bunch of different states um, that have helped spread coverage a little bit is important to us because while people, as you well know, while people could save in IRAs on their own, they could go down to the bank and open an IRA and start saving whenever they want, right? So they have the
Right.
perfect, but in reality, given human behavior, almost nobody does that.
Right.
And when we look at the money in the retirement system, when we look at the money in retirement assets and savings, there's a lot of money in IRAs, but it's overwhelmingly rollovers from 401ks and DC plans. So it
Correct.
wasn't actively saved. It was actively saved in the employee environment through the workplace rather than people going out on their own and saving in these vehicles. So that's a continuing matter of interest to us. Obviously, we're concerned with the long range solvency of the Social Security program, which I go back and say, when I was a graduate student and took a federal budgeting class in the early 1990s, we were concerned with the long range fiscal solvency of Social Security.
And if I can just interject one
Yeah.
thing here, kind of on your note, one of your first publications with the Center for Retirement Research is about that very topic from 25 years ago. You happened to write it on my birthday in the year 2000. So I commend you for picking a great date to write it. But to be fair, you've been expressing concern over this for, I mean, I'm sure even much longer than that, but documented at least for the last 25 years.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
and I think that's really, it's really what led me to ask for this chat today, is that I don't know that there's anybody that I could point to that is still actively talking about this, that has the history that you do, and then that the center does as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it goes back a ways. I could come up with some other people, but I hear you.
Of course.
If and I can stop talking now, or I can add a couple more things that we're looking for, if that's still useful, the priority issues that we think are
Please.
important. Okay. So the other areas are with the growing lifespans of people, we've been turning more to the risks, financial risks that people face once they reach retirement. And we're involved in a multi-year exercise right now with support and collaboration of Jackson National Life Insurance and Greenwald Research, which is a survey research company based in Washington, that we have been systematically looking at longevity risk, healthcare risk, which includes both regular day-to-day medical expenses and long-term care. We have looked at inflation risk a little bit. We are planning to embark on projects related to public policy risk more broadly, changes to government programs that could affect people's security and retirement, and family risk issues, financial issues related to supporting family members, sometimes unexpectedly, that can affect your ability to save and prepare for retirement. So that's a big area we're interested in. Coincident with that is the long-term care generally, both the supply and demand sides, the senior housing market and availability of those opportunities and affordability. So and also the way that people take their nest eggs at retirement and translate that into some sort of lifelong income stream or not, which generally they don't do that, as you know, they don't buy annuities.
Sure.
But that's another issue that's kind of top of mind for us. And then, other little things along the way. But that's sort of the bigger picture things: the coverage issue, the risks in retirement that people face, the long-term care market, et cetera.
And you guys have phenomenal pieces that you put out along the way on each and every one of those topics. I think specifically, at least for the duration of our chat today, I'd like to talk about the solvency of Social Security. And so if we can do that, I think there is a tremendous thirst for the knowledge in the market. We've been doing in-person workshops over the last 8 years here in South Florida, and our attendance is just through the roof right now. We had 75 people in a library workshop last night, and overwhelmingly at the end of those things, obviously people come up and they ask you questions. The big question right now is, are we running out of money? And I think that's a very, very simple way to put the question, but that's the way that a lot of our consumers are looking at this problem. And I think you and I, who have probably, you specifically, read much more on the topic than I have, know that it is much more complex than that. But if you could give me just a brief overview in words that you think the general public understands as to what is this problem that we're facing, and is it real?
Yeah. Well, certainly it's absolutely real that Social Security has a long-term financing problem. We do like to reassure people that if you're talking about today or tomorrow, or even next year or the year after that, this is not uh, this is not an imminent daily tomorrow kind of problem, but it's
Right.
not that far off, and it's getting closer, as a way to put it. And so essentially, as you know, there's the Social Security Administration brings in most of the revenue through a payroll tax. They get some income taxes on benefits. They get some interest earnings credited to them by the Treasury for the reserves they built up in the past. Um, and then, so they have a somewhat of a trust fund built up. The trust fund is an accounting device, but it does provide real budget authority to Social Security to pay benefits. So we used to get a lot of these questions on the budget side. People are saying, is the trust fund real? It's not invested in things outside the government. And there's sort of a funny answer to that. In some ways, it's like it is real in that those bonds, the government bonds that make up the Social Security Trust Fund, are in a vault in West Virginia. And that there was some law at some point past 20, 30 years ago, I think now, that required physical documents to be printed to record that these securities existed. But the bigger
And that
picture
still
is,
exists?
as far as I know, yeah, I don't think
Wow.
there's been any change in the law. So there are pieces of paper that document this obligation. But of course, it is a little bit of an unusual thing when you say the right pocket of the government owes the left pocket of the government money, so to speak.
Sure.
Or you can think of it as yourself putting an IOU from yourself from one account to another account in your other pocket. But it does provide real spending authority for the program, the assets that are in the trust fund, and they have been allowed to draw on them. Medicare has gone through this in the past where they had to draw on their trust fund, and those turn into real dollar bills that go out and pay benefits to people. So the trust fund is real in a practical sense. It's unusual in an accounting sense from some stretch of the imagination, but it's a real it creates real budget authority for the Treasury to pay these bills. Um, and so that on the retirement side of Social Security is the current projections are that the program can continue to pay full benefits to people through 2033. And after that, if there was nothing done by the US Congress and the President of the United States before then, there would be approximately a 21% reduction.
Right.
They would no longer have the authority to pay once the trust fund runs out of money. As you know, again, they would be reliant on the incoming payroll taxes to pay that money that they owed that they're paying out to beneficiaries. Those payroll taxes would continue to roll in. So this is why the notion of Social Security being this term is obviously a loaded term, but thrown around a lot, but that it would be bankrupt is not an accurate term, in that
Sure.
it has a viable source of revenue, but it does not have a viable source of revenue that's large enough to pay the benefits that are currently scheduled to be paid to people.
And if my memory serves me right, that flipped in about 2021. The surplus, the income coming in, became
Yeah.
a deficit about 2021.
I think that's right. I think that's the year where the balance in the trust fund started to be drawn down so that it was no longer increasing. There was a period before that where the cash from tax payments going in was not enough to pay the full amount. But when you consider the interest credits that the trust fund was accruing, they still led to an increase in the year-to-year balance of the trust fund until about 2021.
So I like to look at trends when I'm looking at this kind of thing. And if I look back on the article that I mentioned that you wrote in the year 2000, the projection at that time was at Social Security that this was going to happen in 2037 if nothing happened. And we're significantly closer. 2037 still sounds like some futuristic
Yeah.
Jetsons date to me, but we're significantly closer. And if the date now is 2033 that projection is, we're within a decade.
Yep.
Do you think that, and obviously opinion here because we aren't the ones that get to make these rules.
Right.
Is there anything that is being talked about currently that would change the tides of that trend where people maybe should feel like, well, there is still some hope? Or is this something that people should start planning for now?
Well, I will start on the always some hope side because, first of all, this is still, I think, not even arguably. I think this is Social Security is the most popular single government program, I believe, or certainly one of them.
Yes.
And public opinion polling has long been highly supportive of the program, of continuing the program. There's even some public support for expanding benefits in the program in terms of what the desired approach would be for people and having larger benefits, perhaps even. But the support is very strong in the public. Yeah, I think you'll see that reflected, and you have over the many years. One reason of Congress and successive presidents, the current president has said that he would not cut Social Security benefits. Certainly, members of Congress are loath to cut Social Security benefits. So there seems to be a meeting of the minds in the sense of a bipartisan commitment or strong commitment and desire to not cut Social Security benefits.
They all see the train coming, so to speak, right?
They all see the train coming and they know that people are worried about that. Obviously, if you don't cut benefits, then you need some additional revenues coming into the system. And so so the other thing I would point to is that Congress is often does things at the last minute. And
That's putting it nicely.
that's putting it nicely. My wife used to cover Congress as a reporter, and she would say that they act like college students who are getting, final exam time rolls around and it's like, oops, I better study.
Or email the professor for an extension, even, right?
That's right, or an email for an extension. So the last time that there was a near-term financial problem in Social Security was the early 1980s. And that, of course, there was no point at which the trust fund ran down to zero because Congress and the president intervened before that to change the laws. They made future combination of revenue increases and spending reductions. Some of them were set to occur well into the future, and I know you're well aware of these things, but for example, the rise in the full benefits retirement age, the legislation was passed in like 1983, 84, and the increase in the full benefits retirement age didn't start until the late 1990s. So there was like a 15-year lead time on one of the major cuts or reductions. There were some other reductions that took place earlier, but one of the biggest ones was the increase in the full benefits retirement age. So there is a precedent for Congress waiting up until the very last minute and then stepping in and acting. And I think we possibly could see that again this time. Certainly, we're going to get closer. But the good news is that the program is very important. Constituents care a lot about it. Legislators care a lot about what their constituents say and think. And so people who want to express their opinion to their legislatures can actually make a difference. The volume of emails and texts and letters that people get do make a difference if you're a member of the House of Representatives or the Senate or the President of the United States. So that's why I think that there will be a solution at some point. Now, that solution, it's worth pointing out, doesn't necessarily mean that everybody ends up in 2034 and beyond getting 100% of the benefits that were expected under existing law. And that's from the simple matter of there's likely to be some combination of changes to benefits and taxes like there was in the 1980s. But you won't get to this thing. There will be at some point, it's extraordinarily likely that Congress will act before the date where everything just, drops down to 21% of 21% benefit cut. So I think that's extraordinarily unlikely that would occur. And so if that should give people some hope that there will be a little bit of clarity, might not be as much as they like. The only other thing I would add at this point is to say that often changes to Social Security are phased in. I mentioned one of them that was phased in before. And so people who are currently receiving benefits when a package of changes is passed are often held harmless.
Mhm.
It may be a little less likely in this case because we're getting closer to the date and it may be a little bit harder to avoid making changes. If I recall correctly, I know in the 1983-84 legislation timeframe, there was a short delay in cost of living increases that was part of that legislation. It was like I want to say like a 3 or 6 month delay. Maybe it was a 6 month delay. That wasn't hopefully a lot in real terms to people and didn't create a lot of angst, too much angst at the time. But added cumulatively over all the people who get Social Security, and then the compounding of that effect of delaying it actually was a significant savings to the program at that point. But it didn't create a lot of near-term disruption for individuals.
I think it's definitely promising to know that it's still some people's opinion that this can be fixed. I think it is a little bit disconcerting for the people who are either receiving their benefits right now or are going to be soon electing their benefits. There's always the conversation about, should I take my benefits early at 62? Should I wait till 70? And it's always my opinion that everybody has their own unique answer. There isn't a blanket answer to that question. Does this looming shortfall in the trust funds budget, should that make a difference when people are thinking about this decision, their filing status? Would you take that into consideration if it was you?
I guess it depends on what age I was in my planning horizon. That would make a big difference. So if I
Sure.
was 40, or let's take a 45-year-old just to start the conversation, I would imagine that you would expect that if you're trying to be prudent and plan ahead for your retirement, determine how much to save today, you would probably be prudent to take into account the fact that there might be somewhat less than 100% of the benefits you're currently scheduled. And again, that's just because likely when there's a fix, there will be some benefit reductions and mixed in with that.
Yeah.
But given the popularity of the program, there could be a tilt toward more revenue and less toward benefit reductions. So I wouldn't necessarily consider it to be a dramatic change if I were 45 and I were thinking about it. But I think it would be on my, if I had the wherewithal to add a couple percentage points of saving into my 401k and I was 45, I would probably say, yeah. In fact, I don't know how you do it in your own practice, but I personally have a financial planner who makes certain assumptions about, I think he actually builds into his planning horizon for people when he's showing data to them. He builds in some sort of adjustment to Social Security that he assumes is part revenue increase, part benefit cut. I don't know how, I forget
Yep.
how he does it. And it's built into the projections. So I think being prudent, it would be prudent to consider that there will be some changes to the program. I think the main thing is not to be overly concerned about it. Um, it's a risk, but the program is very popular. It would be hard to make substantial cuts in benefits. And again, the phase-in periods, to the extent that they can do it with longer phase-in periods, they probably would. That would mean like you get more revenue increases up front. Let's say you were going to increase the payroll tax or take the cap off the existing payroll tax or raise the cap. Those would bring in money right away. That would probably stave off the situation enough so that any spending reductions could be phased in more gradually. But
I've
I
Oh,
wouldn't
go ahead.
expect I wouldn't expect dramatic, like even under the sort of worst case scenario that nothing happens until 2033, you're not talking about not having Social Security or only having half of your benefit. You're talking about having like about 80%. And even over a 75-year time horizon, that's projected by the program's actuaries, that number only shrinks to about 75%. So that's if nothing else were done. That's
Sure.
just relying on the payroll tax revenue coming in. It assumes absolutely zero policy reaction to help protect the most popular government program of all time. So that's why I say like it's prudent to take this into account in your planning. Now, if I was a little bit older, I mean, you have to weigh that against as you well know, the benefits of delay financially is that you get about a 6.5 to close to 8% increase in your check for every
Sure.
year you delay. So to the extent, and in fact, one of the things that we've talked about and written a little bit about at our center is this idea of, if you are in this position, using your personal savings from a 401k to essentially bridge your way to a higher Social Security benefit. So in
Yep.
your early mid 60s, whenever you're retiring, or your later 60s even, you draw down, you can mimic the size of your Social Security benefit. You could draw on your 401k assets first, and then at 70, you could wait and claim, get your maximum monthly benefit from Social Security. The math works out really well, and a lot of that for many people. That's a very unusually good deal for like a guaranteed increase in an investment from
It
7
sure
to
is. You don't get a
7%.
guarantee 8%
Yeah,
increase anywhere year over year.
7, 8%. Yeah. So that's basically, I mean, as we get closer, you get closer to the wire, I can see why people are more concerned. Right now, what do we say? We're like about 8 years out. I think if I was thinking of retiring in the next 5 years, I wouldn't be too worried about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
You still need to figure out what makes the most sense to you. Um,
I would still be tilting toward that increase in the monthly benefit that you're going to get by delay
it's still pretty nice.
is still pretty nice, and weighing that against the prospect that you might have may or may not be affected by a benefit cut. And again, in the old days, when I was a younger policy analyst, we used to say that it was highly likely that Congress would hold people 55 and above harmless in any kind of major package of reforms.
Yeah.
I still think that would be the ideal way. That would be a good way to do it, because you give people more. You take away some of that anxiety that people might feel once they hit their mid 50s. But no guarantees about how that would work, especially as we get closer to the date. That's why it would be nice to have things addressed sooner, and then that would provide that clarity and certainty that people want.
Definitely. And I'll just touch on one thing, and I've heard you talk about it in a separate interview. I hear a lot of people say, well, why don't we just extend the full retirement age out for younger people? And you specifically mentioned this in another talk, and I believe you and Alicia have also written about it, that this conversation is much more complex than just extending out that full retirement age for younger individuals. Would you agree with that?
Oh, in the sense that you're not going to get all the way to filling the financing gap by just this one change.
It's an answer that people like this, like it seems like they're just looking to slap a band-aid on, and it feels like maybe this conversation is more complex than just changing the full retirement age as they've done before.
Well, it definitely is in terms of like the size of the hole you need to fill. So just from a basic math standpoint of money in, money out, you can get it's not a trivial. You can get a fairly big chunk of that shortfall could be fixed by it depends on how fast you raise the age, how high you raise the age, whether you index it for longevity increases or stop at say age 70. But you can get, I'm trying to think, the numbers are somewhere between 20 and 40-ish% of the problem, doing it that way, raising the full retirement age. So yeah, but it's not a full solution.
Yeah.
It would be a partial solution. Um, and one thing that is maybe worth throwing into the conversation you might be interested in, there's a little bit of an emerging buzz in the policy community, I guess I would say, around the idea of raising the full retirement age in a way that holds harmless some people from the increase. And that's never been done before. It's always been a one size fits all retirement age. But
Right.
there's actually a proposal on the table from a very well known, well respected expert from the Brookings Institution who served many years in Congress and is very familiar, didn't serve as a member of Congress, but staff person, um, very well respected, who put out a blueprint for solving Social Security, one of many hundreds that you could put out. But very recently, and he had this idea of raising the age and basing it on your income level. So it would go up higher for people of higher incomes who are more likely to have ability to command higher wages and have healthier lives and live longer and things like that.
And there's
So
already some income requirements on people that are claiming before their full retirement age. So I don't know that that would be totally unprecedented, right?
uh, when you say income requirements on
So
people, yeah, go ahead.
so there's an income means test that's applied if you want to apply for your benefit and you're still working before your full retirement.
Oh,
And so, I mean, they're
yeah.
already looking at people's income for some qualification of benefits. I mean, would it be something similar to that?
Well, it would be a little different in the sense that the one you're referring to is when you're below the full retirement age and you retire if your earnings exceed a certain threshold, right? That yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
retirement earnings test comes into play. The difference there is that that is designed to be paid back to you later on. A lot of people,
right.
most people I'm sure that you talk to don't know that. It's very outside of the expert circles. It's not well known. So it would be different in the sense that it wouldn't be paid back. It would just be like
If
if
you're
you're
under
in the
this
top,
level, you qualify, and if
yeah,
you're over, you don't.
if at age 50 or age 60, you're in the top 30 or 40% of wage earners in the country, you are average wage over your career at that point, you are going to face an increase in the retirement age. And if you're below that level, you don't have any change in the full retirement age.
That's a tough one for a politician to push through, I'm sure, huh?
I totally agree. I think the communication, I think from a policy standpoint, it has some attractiveness to it.
Of
But
course.
in terms of, we've got to take the hit somewhere. How do we do that and let the people who have the most ability to pay and that kind of thing? But it would be really difficult to communicate to the American public and
Yeah.
complicated to administer, in my opinion.
All right. So I don't want to keep you for too much longer. I know it's a Friday night. I would love to talk more at some point in the future. But if you were if you were talking to a 60-year-old who was nervous to make a mistake, was worried about all of the topics that we've discussed today, what would you say? What's your takeaway? How would you best tell them to prepare for their retirement as it relates to their Social Security decision?
hmm. um, 60 years old. Yeah.
Those are the people that are coming to my workshop.
I would say that there's a pretty good chance that you will not be affected at all. Pretty good chance. I can't.
Good.
It's like I guess that's the best. I don't know how comforting that is to people to hear pretty good chance, but I would say
It's better than what they're hearing in other circles, I think.
yeah, there's a pretty good chance, and that maybe a reminder. Oh, you don't like bringing up worst case scenarios because that makes people nervous generally, but a reminder that even if nothing were done until 2033, which is extraordinarily unlikely given the popularity of this program, um, we're talking about 21% reduction in their benefit. So that if they're a worst case scenario person and you need to explain that to them, you could say that. But that would mean we'd have some really big problems going on in this country if it were that we couldn't pass legislation to fix Social Security's finance. This is not a complicated, as you know, this is not a complicated problem. I'd say a complicated problem is Medicare because that involves healthcare and who gets what services and all that. This is just money. All right. It's not about your health, not just money. Money is very important.
Money
But
that comes in and money that goes
money
out.
that comes in and money that goes out. So there are a zillion, as you know, again, and there's a great, I don't know if you've ever looked at it, but there's a great booklet on the Social Security Administration website put out by the actuaries. They have a list of like, I think it's like 100 some policy options. and they score all of them, and they tell you like, okay, what if you want to raise payroll tax by 1 percentage point? What if you want to raise the retirement age? What if you want to cut benefits for high earners by 10%? What if you want to do X? What if you want to do
It
Y?
is a very cool tool.
Yeah, you've seen, yeah. So it's amazing. But
I almost feel like though they put it there so they could let us realize that maybe it's not as easy as we say it is. But, they
oh, well,
let
the
us
way
play
I
with
think
it.
of that is there are 100 different ways you could fix it. And actually, Alicia would say, often has said, if you put me down in a room by well, even with three people, let's put it this way, Dan, if you and I sat down in a room, gave ourselves an hour, we could come up with a Social Security reform plan.
I
So
agreed.
I don't think I could do that with you on Medicare. I have no idea what I would do on Medicare, but I could definitely come up with a Social Security plan. We'd go over these options. I used to volunteer for a group called the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget back when I was a budget analyst. And they would go around the country and hold seminars called Exercise in Hard Choices. And they would get people to show up, members of the public, who would go through and look at different ways to fix the budget deficit, overall federal deficit, and the specific deficit in Social Security. And they would do this. And at the end of the session, they'd have a plan, a 3 hour, whatever it was, right? And these are people who, average citizens, right? But you can explain to them, this is simple dollars and cents,
Yep.
and you could fix it. So that's the good thing about Social Security. It's actually not technically complicated to fix it all, but it's how you have the political will to even go and tell anybody in your district, look, I'm going to raise your taxes or I'm going to cut your future benefits.
Those are
People
hard
don't like to
conversations.
do that.
No.
And that's
No,
why
it's
we
not
have
good for your
large budget
political career.
deficits.
Right.
That's why we let, but this is where people like you and I, but more you because you're on the front lines, can help, because our dream had been, we did something called the Social Security Fix It book, which tried to do this at a very high level,
About
and it had some of these
10 or
options.
12 years ago, right?
Yeah, I think that's the last time we updated it. Still on our website for free download and all that. And the numbers haven't changed dramatically. They've gone up a little bit for the size of the problem, I guess. But our dream was, the goal of this booklet was to get it into the hands of everybody. That's very hard to do.
So hard.
But get in the hands of as many people as we could, and that by educating individuals, that would give the bandwidth to members of Congress to make a tough decision. So if you get enough constituents who vote regularly and talk to their members of Congress, they say, look, I know this is not easy for you, Congressperson X, but I want to tell you that it would be good to solve this problem. I'm going to tell you that I would do it 50% on the tax side and 50% on the benefit side, or 75% on the revenue side. And so that was our dream. That's our dream of how this would work, and
Right.
that would push the decision. And so it's hard to get there. But if you think of yourself as making progress on that front, I would say you're doing a really good service every day for your clients and for the country.
I feel like we're making a ton of progress. I have or had no interest in ever creating any content other than just what I do in my in-person seminars. But I think it would be irresponsible of me to ignore how many people are showing up to these things. I have to put people on a wait list. I can't even handle the amount, and I'm doing them monthly, and I'm doing them over 4 counties here in Florida. And there's more people than I can get to. And I feel like the message is more convoluted than ever. There is more unreliable sources of information than
That's a
ever.
challenge.
And I
Yep.
wish that I could direct everybody to you guys, because you do such a great job of putting out very clear and easy to understand information. And so I'll take this time to just thank you for taking the time to talk to me and letting us to, kind of pick your brain.
Yeah, and you've probably also seen our Social Security claiming guide, which is more of an evergreen product. It doesn't
Yes.
get outdated too fast. But yeah, so I appreciate what you're trying to do. We will keep doing what we're trying to do on our end. You're right. There's a challenge with the amount of information that comes that isn't even checked or vetted, unfortunately, that gets into the public conversation. So, we just got to push back and fight the good fight. And I think the key thing that you have, I think someone like you, particularly, the key problem that I'm concerned about with communicating to people is just whether they'll trust, and you alluded to this already with this information that they're getting. But I think you're in a position where I would say you're successful. You've been in this business for a while. You know what you're doing. You know your stuff, right? Your clients trust you, and or they wouldn't be your clients, right?
Sure.
So
I hope
you have
so.
the
If they're watching this, I hope so,
yeah, so you have the advantage of being able to you have that bond, that trust bond, and that's what is so difficult in the current environment. It has been for many years, obviously, to some
Right.
degree. But there's concern about who people will trust. And the best thing you can do is build trusted relationships with people and point them to good information. And I have to think that in the long run, that's going to win out.
Yep. Yep. I agree. And I if you're ever feeling discouraged about the job or the mission that you all are doing there, please don't. You at least have one fan here in South Florida that's trying to spread your information around. But I'm sure you have many more fans than just me. But we appreciate it. This has been great, and I very much appreciate your time.
Happy to do it.